What's up, everybody? I am here with Dustin Helton. He kind of started this whole straight out of WAC football podcast, and we also got a special guest, WAC Commissioner Jeff Hurd. Guys, it's going to be a fun recording. I'm glad to be here, Dustin. I've kind of put you off for the first two episodes you had here, but I'm glad that you asked me to be on this one, and glad that we get to have the commissioner here with us.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. And Kyle, I understand you wanted to see what it looked like for the first 2 weeks before you got in. I get it. It's okay.
Dustin's done a great job of starting this off, and we're going to be bringing you this football podcast every week. It's been great. And, Commissioner, we have to, applaud you for bringing football back to the conference. The WAC was on, I want to say, life support for a few years, and now it's more stable than it ever has been over the past, I want 7-8 years or so.
Well, I think you're 100% right. Life support's a good description. Early when I first took over this job, I was the interim for a little more than a year, and in 1 year, we had 7 schools leave, and so I had to figure out a way to. We were actually down to 3 members heading into the 13-14 season, and we had to figure out a way to survive. And by a series of, quite honestly, fortunate happenings, we were able to do that for beginning of 13-14 year. And whether that was going to last a year or now it's almost 10 years, I don't think anybody knew. But we got lucky, to be honest. And we also had commitment from the members we did bring in, and it led us to where we are today. And a lot of ups and downs in between, but I really like where the conference is today, and I like where it's headed in the future.
So, kind of walk us back. At least, it's been a few years since the WAC has had football. You're looking at bringing it back. How did you approach the Texas schools? How did you approach, Dixie and Tarleton? I guess what was the mindset and the thought of going, hey, let's go after Sam Houston and UNF Austin and all those others and get them in our conference and out of the Southland?
Well, it really wasn't just me. There were a number of people involved in this. And, you have to go back a little bit to when we added Tarleton and Dixie State to the conference, because what went unnoticed at that time by many people was the fact that we were adding 2 transitioning institutions to the conference that both had football programs, and they were leaving. And in Dixie's case, leaving a Division II conference that was a pretty good football league. Tarleton also leaving a conference that played football to go to Division I that had a 4-year waiting period to a conference that did not have football. And so that, at that time, I knew, and I think our membership knew at the time, that we needed to figure out a way to, if we're going to solidify the conference, we had to do it by adding institutions that had football programs, and that we had to create, our mindset at that time was to create an FCS league, because quite honestly, that's what the opportunity was. And so roughly a year, we made the announcement on January 14th of this year. Roughly a year prior to that, I was at the NCAA convention in Anaheim, and that was in January also. And I was told by one of our athletic directors, or approached by one of our athletics directors, and told that, hey, there may be an opportunity with a couple Southland schools. And that's the way it was phrased at the time. I had dinner there too with one of our presidents, and we talked in generality about football, and whether I thought it could be whether it was realistic to think we could add football back to the conference. And our conversation then was really not FCS or FBS, but really geared more towards, hey, FBS to start with, because the WAC was an FBS league. And so anyway, that's just a long way of saying that led to early discussions. And those discussions took place over about a 10-month period. And there were several times during those discussions where there were times when I felt, and I've reported back to my board, that it looks good, And then there were several times when it didn't look so good, that we didn't know if we could put all the pieces together, if we could really get, four. The two became four, and it was really hey, if you're gonna do this, it's all for one. And I had a meeting in Houston last May with the four institutions. And again, at that time, it was really just in the discussion stage. Hey, is this a possibility? And we thought at the time, yes, it was a possibility, but it was nowhere near a sure thing. A lot of things had to be put into place and ironed out. And you're asking institutions, in some cases, longtime members of one conference, to take a flyer on another one. A vision that we had. And it went beyond football. I mean, football was key to, bringing it back to the conference and creating a football conference. But it also did not take a back seat to the fact we were adding strength to our basketball league. We were adding strength to other team sports, baseball, softball, all the team sports, men's and women's. And so we thought that we were increasing the overall strength of the league in many ways. We were making better sense of our geography, which, as you well know, was not if you're going to drop a conference from the start, you wouldn't have a team in Southern Texas, one in Chicago, one in Seattle, and Southern California and all that. And so we had to try to make sense of our geography, make sense of travel, and that was a big piece in our discussions. Was how do we make this work? We can talk about football all we want, but how do we make this work for all the other sports? We sponsor 20 championships. And so how do we make sense of travel? How do we make it economically feasible? What's the long-term prognosis? And what's it going to be in 5 years? What's it going to be in 10 years? Well, obviously we don't know that, but we had to kind of guess could we put something together that could sustain long-term? And, that's I guess a long way of saying that's roughly how it happened.
I want to ask you, how did you mentioned it about strengthening the basketball and all the other sports with the additions, but I guess, what was the feeling of the non-football schools when all this was going down, like when the talks were there? Because, you want to drive football, especially with the additions of Tarleton-Dixie State. But, CBU, GCU, which is a big part of the WAC, doesn't have football. Seattle, Utah Valley, these schools that don't have football, what was their thought on the whole thing?
Well, the key to that was roughly, I want to say about 3 years ago, I went to the board of directors, which is the presidents of all our schools. That's who I report to. They're my bosses. And for a few of those years prior to that, when I had my job performance review, one of the key elements of that was always, hey, we need to solidify our membership. Well, that's an easier said than done thing in many ways. But I went to him. I said, I think that we need to at least look at adding football. And at the time, I had no clue whether we could add football or not. I just knew that there were very few institutions out there that did not have football programs, but were still Division I, and that we might be able to bring into our membership. Very few schools that were even possibilities. And by adding football, it opened up the avenue of in many different directions that you could look. You might have, and with those schools without football, you might have had 5 or 6 that you could even talk to. Those with football, that number was closer to the 15 to 20, maybe 25 that you could at least talk to. And so that's what started it. But to answer your question specifically, the key for those institutions was, if we're going to add football, they didn't really have an issue with that as much as it was, as long as we don't do it at the expense of basketball. As long as we're able to either, and quite honestly, if we're able to do something to improve our basketball top to bottom, then the football was, that was fine.
Which you're going to do by bringing in Stephen F. Austin, Sam Houston, who won the Southland, Abilene Christian, who went to the NCAA tournament, beat Texas. It worked out pretty much really well all the way around.
Well, you got to have a little bit of luck, and we did. We did, with Abilene Christian beating Texas, with Sam Houston State winning the national championship. We knew Sam Houston obviously has always had a very good football program, but to bring a national championship with it in the first year also was a little bit of a bonus, or maybe not a little bit, a big bonus. And so, like I said earlier, you have to get a little bit lucky, and we did. But at the same time, we knew we were bringing quality institutions into the conference, and at different stages of where they are with their programs. But we also knew in some cases they were near the top, and they improved us as a conference by coming in.
All right, so excuse me, sorry. So we get to July 1st, 2021. It's WAC Day, as we called it, all across the SFA and SAM social media. But as we get so far with this season of football, getting to watch WAC football come back, I know it's tied in with the A7. We have the AQ7 to get a playoff, to at least get one auto bid for the playoffs. Just so far, how are you enjoying watching the WAC this year?
I love
watching it. And
I really do. I missed it. I went almost 10 years without football, and it seems like a long time, and it is a long time. But I went to Stephen F. Austin the very first weekend of conference football, and one of my staff members had come up with this statistic, and I didn't know it exactly, but I knew it was a long time. So I asked him to say, when was the last time the WAC played a conference football game? And so he came up with it was 3,199 days.
Goodness.
So I was presented with a football at the Stephen F. Austin Tarleton game on September 4th, and that's what it says on it. Stephen F. Austin versus Tarleton State, first WAC conference game in 3,199 days. I have it in my office, so I'll always keep that. And to be honest with you, I felt like a little kid standing down on the field before the game started, just talking with some people and, watching people come into the stadium. And it was only about 98 degrees at night or something like that, but just watching people come in and thinking, what it really meant to the conference. Certainly meant a lot to me personally, but more than that, it meant WAC was going to have football again, and it was going to be long term.
And you get to have fans in the stands too. I mean, that had to have played a huge part in the emotion that was going on there too. What happened last year with all the sports, this year you got to see a full, stadium full of fans for a WAC football game you haven't seen in almost 4,000 days.
Yeah, no, you're right, and it was really a good feeling. It's not just it's everything that goes on with college football. It's the fans, it's the band. It's the two teams coming out on the field to start with. I met with the game officials about an hour before kickoff, and that was the first for them too. We had to put together a whole officiating crew for the year and hire a coordinator of officials. And so for them, even though they wasn't their first game that officiated, obviously, but it was the first time coming to a new league to them, and so that was a big deal for them too. And just the whole night was really special.
Do you remember the last WAC football game that was played before this season started? I didn't look back at it, so I don't remember. But do you remember? Since
I sure do. I'll give you two answers. The last conference game was played between New Mexico State. At that time, Texas State was in the league, so that was the last conference game. It was in December of 2013. If I remember correctly, 2013 or 12, one of the two. Oh, and then the last game played by a WAC team was actually in the Military Bowl in Washington D.C., and that was San Jose State against, I believe it was Toledo of the MAC. And I was at that game with my daughter, and I remember leaving that game thinking, that's the era has come to an end. And I wasn't the commissioner at that time, but I was an interim commissioner, wasn't the full-time commissioner. But so those two, we still have memorabilia from those two games in our office.
Wow, I still can't believe how that just the amount of days just shocks me.
I want to know, was that Chris Thompson that came up with that number for you, or was it somebody else on your staff?
No, it was someone else, Dave Chaffin, who's been a WAC staff member for. He was our media director before.
Okay,
Chris
I think I've met Dave before. So
and he's really good at coming up with stuff like that. So if I tried to do it myself, I'd probably still be counting. he was able to do it in about 10 minutes. So that's
So I want to ask you, with your time in the WAC, 37 years, maybe there's not one that sticks out to you, but like, I guess I'll ask one of the moments from WAC football that kind of sticks out to you, or that will, I don't know. Like I said, there's probably not one, but maybe a couple of them if you have them.
well, I do have a couple. There is one that stands out to me, and it was Boise State against Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl, 2007. And I'll never forget that night because at that time I was the senior associate of the WAC. I went with my boss, Carl Betson, who was a great guy, worked for him for 18 years. We went to that game. We were just thrilled to be in the game, to be honest, to have a school in the game. That was a big thing for us because the WAC had gone through several changes, and we brought in Boise, we brought in Nevada and Fresno and a bunch of schools, and we didn't know what was going to happen, and get the opportunity to be in at that time one of the big bowl, it still is, big bowl game, playing a traditional power in Oklahoma.
And Oklahoma was a double-digit favorite. I can't remember.
Oh yes,
I think he's a 20-point favorite somewhere in there that game too. Like, nobody expected Boise to even be close,
including me. And but the game goes on, and Boise, kind of, I wouldn't say dominates, but was in control most of the game. And then the tide turns, and you get down towards the end thinking, oh, well, great effort, but they're going to fall short. And then everybody knows what happened. And I remember leaving the stadium thinking, this could sound corny to you guys, but it's really true. Walking out of the stadium, and I was there with my daughter, my oldest daughter, who's a big sports fan, my wife, and I walking out, and I said, if my career ends tomorrow, we've reached the mountaintop. It's just, I can live with that. And so that was the biggest single game that I can remember, in the conference, and several other big ones, but none of them compare to that.
That hook and ladder was the only time it'll ever be executed to perfection, was right then in that game. And I mean, I think I was sitting in my living room watching it on TV, and I was shocked when they pulled it off. And then to go for two to win the game, I mean, that was.
Yeah, the play they ran to get the two, that was something. But, that's just it's one of the things that makes college football such a great sport, because no matter how many games you see, you'll eventually see something that you haven't seen before, and the unexpected happens. It's like the NCAA basketball tournament in the first couple of rounds, when there's always an upset or two or three or four of the things you don't think will happen. But, as my dad always told me, that's why you play the games. And, it's just, so it makes it such a great sport.
True.
Totally agree. Now, so, we're going through our first year, and we look at the future. I know that at the end of the year, you're stepping down after a very storied career with the WAC, but with the addition of Southern Utah getting the 7 teams, I guess my question would be, if you weren't stepping down, what would be your vision for the WAC and for continued growth? Would you go after more schools? Would you stay at a 7 for football? I mean, would you decide, hey, we're going to plant our FBS flag and jump back up? What would have been your vision for the conference?
Well, even though I'm stepping down, I still have a vision, and I'm still involved in things that are going on, right now. I believe, and this is my personal belief, is that 7 is not where we want to be, that we need to be at probably 9 is the number. And it's obvious, scheduling reasons. You have 4 home games, you have 4 away games. You still have opportunities for non-conference, guarantee games if you want to play them. You don't have to go out and try to find, 4 or 5 games. And so that's why I believe that's the right number. We're actually going to be at 8 eventually in 25 when UTRGV adds football. So we're going to be there. And 8's workable. 9 is, in my opinion, ideal. You could make a case for 10. So I think you don't settle on a specific number as much as you look at possibilities and the pros and cons of each. And then what's going to dictate where you go is who's available, who's interested, what does your membership want. You could have 8 football playing members, and you might have 4 that wants to add another one and 4 that doesn't. And so you have to kind of, go through that scenario and have a lot of conversations with all the players in it, and that includes athletic directors, and it includes coaches, it includes university presidents, and lay out the pros and cons of each and see how that plays itself out. So, that's where I think we should be. Now that leads to the next question. That is, okay, if you do that, what's the total number? We're going to be at 13. If you add, with UTRGV, you're not adding anybody. They're already in the league, so you're still at 13. So you're at 13 and 8 eventually. The other question becomes, if you add one, if you had another school that plays football, you're at 14 and 9. Maybe that's workable. Maybe it's not, but you have to look at that. Geography plays a role in that too. And I think the other question has to be the AQ status. If we don't add anybody in the next 2 years, or actually if we don't add anybody before next year, we don't have an AQ. And we won't have an AQ if we don't add anybody until be the 2 more years of not having it, and then the 3rd year we would. I guess that'd be 24 when we would have the AQ, or at least qualify for it. So that's a determining factor too. How important is that to get the automatic qualification for the next 2 years? It's probably one of those questions that depends on who you ask. I think it's important. How important, I think, is up to the schools. Then you have to look down the road further than that and say, well, where do we want to be as a conference? Let's say this is 2021. Where do we want to be as 2030 approaches? And is that still at the FCS level? Is it targeting FBS? I don't think there's an answer to that question right now. My initial thought was we need to become the best FCS conference we can, in the next 5 years. And then we can start looking ahead towards something else if that's what the schools want to do. Now, again, this is me talking. You can talk to other people, probably have a different point of view, but that's the way I look at it. And I think you have to be a little bit careful for a couple of reasons. One, we don't know what the landscape's going to be beyond beyond this year. We don't know what it's going to be, and we don't know what FBS is going to look like down the road. So I think it's great to have that as a goal, but we have to grow ourselves, and we have to get better each year and get to the point where we not only have the national champion, but we have 3 or 4 others who are capable of also winning the national championship.
Yeah, I actually have a friend who's a Idaho Vandals guy, and I just messaged him. I was like, "You want to come back to the WAC? You want to come back home?"
I've been at the Kibbe Dome a few times.
I would say go for Weber State and just have this I-15 rivalry between the Wild Wolverines, Thunderbirds, and the Trailblazers. I mean, that's regional enough for you, I guess. So that
if you can talk them into coming, just I'll give you my phone number. They can call me.
Oh, good times. Good times.
And you hit on something though that's this also a factor in all this. So you have to look at the geography. Yeah. Right now with the eight we talked about, you have 6 in Texas, and you have basically 2 in Utah. So if you're going to add another one, does it make more sense to be in the West? Does it make more sense to be somewhere in the middle, or does it make more sense to be on the Texas side of it? And again, that comes down to who's available and who's the best fit for the conference. And there's a number of ways to look at that, and a number of schools that you need to ask that question of.
Well, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier. It can't. I mean, sure, football's a priority, but you have to, like you said, what's best for the conference in basically all sports, not just one, because not all schools have football, so they want to see the benefits that they're going to reap if it's another good basketball school or so. Yeah, I mean that's a tough call because, like you said, the landscape of college athletics is always changing. I mean, there's talks right now about more conference realignment coming and so forth that It's amazing the stuff that you guys have to deal with within the conference, but then you have to pay attention to everything else that's going around with regard to all that.
No, you really do. And I can't remember who I was talking to, but it wasn't too long ago. It's like being an athletic director, and in your desk drawer, you have a little piece of paper in there with names written on it. So you plan for when you have to hire a new coach in whatever sport it might be. You have to have your list in advance. And to some extent, what we're talking about is the same thing. We need to have a list. We need to know, okay, which schools do we have interest in, first of all? What schools do we think are good fits? And then you take the next step to find out, well, would they have interest in talking to us? And there's various stages of that. Getting your foot in the door is the first part. And then you have to have a vision. You have to have a path to get there. And then you have to get buy-in. And there's a process to that. And in some cases, you have those who are interested in at least talking. In some cases, you have those who say, thanks, but no thanks. And, in some cases, you have others who maybe have the same vision you do. So that's the way to look at it. And I have a couple, you'll get tired of me saying this, but I have a couple of cliches that people who know me really get tired of me saying it. But, there's two of them, and one of them, Notre Dame hasn't applied and probably isn't. And the other one is, it's like the high school prom. When you're in high school, the prettiest girl in the school is not going to go to the prom with you if you don't ask her. And she may not go anyway, but at least got to ask the question.
I like it.
So that's the same way I look at expansion and trying to make the league a better conference. And you have to be willing to knock on a few doors, and some of them aren't going to be opened. But that's what you have to do, because if you don't, and you don't look at your future, and you don't look at preparing for the future, someone else is going to beat you to it.
I was going to say, just joking, I was going to say, when you're talking about geography, there is a school right in the middle of our geography who currently plays FBS football, but they're in our conference for everything else, and they don't play FBS football that well. Get them back down. Look, what's his name? Aggie Fanatico on Twitter.
Shots fired, New Mexico State.
We don't talk about New Mexico State on this podcast, so we're just trying to bring them in.
Shots fired. Oh dear.
Yeah, I don't think New Mexico State is interested in moving on to FCS. You want to call it that, but I like the way you think. Like I said earlier, you have to look at all options, and some are better than others, and some are more realistic than others. But nevertheless, you look at every one.
Yeah.
Commissioner, I want to ask you something. What is, from your time within the WAC, what's been the biggest, the craziness that you've had to deal with from when it all first started with, you had the Arizona State, all those schools with BYU, Utah, to then it changing. It's just been ever changing since all over this time. How has that been for you? Like, just the chaos that is constantly the, I guess, ever-changing landscape of college athletics, specifically in this conference where you go from being a very good football conference, having top 10 teams year after year, having basketball games on Big Monday or Super Tuesdays. Those BYU Utah games that were on Big Monday late at night, those were great. And then to a conference that's on life support, to now where it's been restabilized with the addition of other teams. Just kind of talk a little bit about that chaos that you guys deal with every day from a conference standpoint.
Well, you have a lot of nights where you don't sleep very well. I can tell you that. That began in the mid-'90s, and so, then you just, I'm not sure there's a single answer to that. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of unknowns. I'll be honest with you, and I said this earlier, there were a lot of times we didn't know if we're going to survive. And through you go back to the mid-'90s when the WAC really was probably ahead of its time when it expanded to 16 from 10. And which ultimately and ironically led to its demise. But today, the thought of going to 16 isn't such a crazy idea. when we did it, it was a crazy idea, and we didn't probably think it out well enough before we did it. But the point is, that 16 eventually split to eight. The Mountain West is just what I call it the WAC South because it's based out of Colorado Springs. And although it's changed membership quite a bit too since those days. But after that, and you go through the various transitions that took place, the Big West at one time played football and 1A football. Well, and essentially what we did when we split up, we essentially raided them. That's how Boise State and Nevada, came into the conference. Utah State came into the conference, and then we had kind of a resurgence as we talked about with Boise State. And nobody heard of Boise State football until they came to the WAC. Until they had success before they came to the WAC, but nobody knew about it.
Right.
And then but what happened was the better they got, then other people started looking at them. So they get picked off. And you keep recycling yourself almost. We had to rebrand ourselves. I can't tell you how many times. But even since the time I've been in the conference, there's been 14 new, since I've been the commissioner, 14 new schools have come into the conference. 3 of them have left. So of the 13 we have right now, 11 of those 13 have come into the WAC during my commissioner's tenure. So that's a lot of uncertainty as you go, through each year to year to year. And prior to that, it was much the same. We went through a period in the mid, 2000, late 2000s to the mid area where it seemed like someone was coming in the door one day and someone was leaving the next. And so we've had a lot of membership change, but we've also been very resilient. We were able to not only survive, but in some cases grow stronger. We took some strategies that many people didn't probably maybe realize we were doing it, but we did. And one of those was to target Division II institutions that had strong programs or good programs and had the desire to move up, also had the resources to be able to do it, and had the vision to do that. And that started with Grand Canyon, when they first came into the conference. And then the Utah Valley, when they came in late, were not far removed from being Division II. Seattle was the same way, not far removed from being Division II. And so we had to take a flyer. We had to, and in part because that's who was available. That's when that old thing. Well, Notre Dame's not available. They're not coming in. So what do we do? And so that was one of our strategies, to bring non-Division I's in, because we knew we had to increase membership, and that was our best opportunity. And we brought in some schools that we believe. Well, Grand Canyon's already proven it. California Baptist is not far behind. And we believe both Tarleton and Dixie State, given the time to develop their programs, and they're in the toughest part of transitioning right now, in that they're in their second year. And that's probably 2 years, 2 and 3 are the hardest because of recruiting difficulties when you don't have an avenue to the NCAA championships. In some cases, not even to some conference championships. But they'll continue to grow, and they'll continue to get better. They have strong leaders at the top with James Hurley at Tarleton and Biff Williams at Dixie State. They have good people on their staffs. They're in good communities. So we're very, very optimistic about where we're going with them.
Yeah, I'll say Dixie State, and I will shout them out on every podcast we do this year, because playing football this year, they have put together what's called the best big boy schedule I've ever seen. Playing South Dakota State, playing Montana, playing Delaware, playing Weber. Just they want to be, they want to be tough, and that's the way to do it. Play against the best, and develop from those games. So I will applaud them on every single podcast we record this fall.
They're a little bit like Gonzaga was 20 years ago, when Gonzaga first decided it was going to become a basketball power, and they got thumped quite a bit early in that process because of the schedules they were playing. But over time, they developed obviously a very strong program, and I think you have to do that. Maybe not quite as strong as they're playing this year, but at the time they were doing their scheduling, they didn't have a conference. and they needed to fill a schedule, and they needed to fill it with what was available. It's ironic. I'm going to be in St. George this weekend for our two, I call them transition, reclassifying is really the term, schools that play each other this weekend. And so I'm looking forward to that. I think both of them have really bright futures. And I can say that without being too homerish, because I'm not going to be here, but I still think they have a great future, and I think the league's going to have a great future.
And to go to your point, I mean, those three transition schools, California Baptist, Dixie State, and Tarleton State, I mean, they all invest in their athletic departments. Like, the facilities that those three schools have are top of the line in this conference, I want to say, because, I mean, Dixie State has had really good facilities since they've been in JUCO. Tarleton State, I mean, what I'm seeing from Tarleton State, they just keep investing in their programs. Same with California Baptist. So that helps too. I mean, it's not like they're going into it saying, oh, we're just transitioning to just be here. They want to compete at the highest levels, so they're going to invest in those programs.
Yeah, the first time I visited California Baptist campus, and to be honest with you, I didn't really know much about them when we first thought, hey, this might be a good program to look at. And at that time, they were in the early stages of building their basketball facility that they have now. And they have some other drawings, they have to do with baseball and soccer. And the president's quite an engaging guy. And I remember the first time I met him, sitting in his office, and he said, Jeff, I want you to understand something. He said, I didn't decide yesterday that we wanted to be Division I. This is a plan that we've had. We've been building towards it. They had to go through their Division II requirements, but that was always their goal. And when he took over that university, it had an enrollment of less than 1,000. And I may be off a couple, but I believe the number was 938 students. Today they're approaching 11,000. So that shows you how they've grown under that particular president's leadership. And they have a commitment, they have a vision, and they have the resources to be able to do it. And that, commitment's that's everything. That's top to bottom, and that's what it takes. You can want to do something, but if you don't have the commitment, and you're not in a community where it's feasible, then it's really, really difficult. But St. George, Utah is one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing communities in the country. Has a commitment to the university. I think they have a really bright future. And so anyway, I'm kind of pontificating probably a little too much, but I really believe that, and I like what we've done. We talk about making sense of our geography. Yeah, we still stretch a bit, but we have 6 schools in Texas. We have 3 in Utah now. All right, yeah, 3 in Utah. With Phoenix and California Baptist off, on the coast, and we have a pretty good geographic pattern through the through the west and southwest. So we still have work to do. I've said that before. If I knew exactly what it was today, I'd tell you. No, I wouldn't. I couldn't tell you. but at least I'd feel better. But we are looking at different options, and we're not done. Whether it happens when I'm still here or not, I don't know. It may not. But we have a good board. We have a good group of presidents, and they're committed to the future of this conference, and that's really, really critical. And I think I like to, as much as I'd like to be staying around. After 37 years, you're welcome a little bit, and it's time for me. I've had the same wife for 49 years and working in the same company for 37. Time to do something else. I think that's the way to put it.
Great way of putting it. Dustin, you got anything else for the commish?
No, I really, Commissioner Hurd, I really appreciate your taking the time to come on today. I also appreciate the hats that I harassed you for on Twitter, and you.
Hey, that's why you got it. I thought I was able to find one, if you even like it, but I had to find one.
No, I appreciate it. Like we said before we record this, 37 years, awesome. Anytime you want to come on here and hang out and wax poetic on WAC football with us, you are more than welcome to. We absolutely.
I'll take you up on that. I got to tell you one story before I go. This has to do with Tarleton. I actually visited Tarleton 3 times before they became a member. And the very first time I went there, they had a different president than they have now, and he was the same guy that was there the second time. And the second time I visited with him, when I got done, he kind of pulled me aside and he said, "Jeff, I really appreciate you coming. I appreciate what you're trying to get done with the conference." He said, "But you have to understand that you're in Texas, and in Texas, football is big, and we have a football program, and the WAC doesn't." He said, "So we really can't consider the WAC right now." True story. So I left there thinking, well, it's nice, met a lot of nice people, enjoyed being there, but it's not going to work. But later on, they have a change at the top, and the attitude changed a little bit, and that's what led to it. And so you never say no, you never say never, and you just don't. You never know what's going to happen. And kind of like that baseball game last night when the ball came off the fence and off the fielder and went over the fence. And I'm kind of a baseball guy, and even I was thinking, I'm not sure I'd ever seen that before. But you just keep piling on, and you ultimately you do the best you can. If you can look yourself in the mirror and know you did, then you have no regrets. And that's the way I look at things right now. And I have no regrets as I leave the WAC, other than wish I was going to stay a little bit longer. But it's been a great ride, and it's been a great conference to work in.
Commissioner Jeff Hurd of the Western Athletic Conference will be. Do I want to say retiring? Is that what we're?
No, I wouldn't say that. I don't consider myself retiring. I'll resurface somewhere doing something.
All right.
Not
After
sure what it'll be, but
37 years at the WAC, last 10 years as commissioner. I mean, took it from life support over the last few years to now very stable. It's going to become a great football conference. It's going to be a great basketball season this year. I mean, and we're looking forward to all of it. Dustin, any last words here before we kind of sign off?
No, just once again, Commissioner, thank you so much for taking the time, and thanks for inviting my alma mater into the WAC and getting us in. I'm looking forward to WAC football growing. For basketball, I'm looking forward to WAC Vegas and the conference tournament. I'm looking forward to playing these great programs and seeing where this conference goes over the next few years.
So am I. I'll probably be watching it in my basement with my two dogs. I'll be watching. Thanks,
all
guys.
right.
I really
Thanks, Commissioner Hurd. Appreciate it. And
thanks,
have a good night, everybody. Thanks, Commish. Appreciate it.
Yeah, enjoyed it, guys. Thank you. I was going to
enjoy the rest of your evening.